Weston and Timmy, arrivederci. Hello, Sunshine. I'm Alexi, Lalas, and welcome to the State of the Union podcast, where we look at the beautiful game on and off the field through the lens of red, white, and blue-colored glasses. This show will be talking, MLS's 30th season preview with the great Taylor Twellman, who will join us as a guest. UEFA Champions League action, Pulicism or Pulicists, I don't know, we'll talk about it. Is the end nigh for Gio? Pep and Man City, and maybe the end of the road. Gabby Petito, the moment you fell in love with soccer, hockey players versus soccer players, MLS 30 years on, snow games, and so much more. But first, joining as always, my friend, my colleague, my guiding light, David Mosse, a soccer savant and a Fox soccer researcher and writer extraordinaire. Mosse, how you doing on this Wednesday, February 19th in the year 2025?
I'm doing well. What a blockbuster show today. That was
we got a lot of stuff to
lead-in.
get to, and when I do the open, I've over the years, because I do it ahead of time before we actually do the show. And so I'm assuming that we're going to get to all of these things. But for those avid listeners and viewers out there, you will know that every so often I will mention something in an effort to tease what's coming up that doesn't actually appear in the show. Maybe it's frustrating, but I'm doing my best to, when I mention it in the preview, that we actually talk about it in the show.
On our last pod, we had a lengthy opening segment, the What Are We Watching segment, and I saw in the comment section on YouTube, some guy actually posted when the pod really begins at the 9-minute mark. He wanted to let everybody know you can fast forward to that if you want to hear
Don't
soccer.
bore us, get to the chorus. I get it. Well, along those lines, are you watching anything?
I've still been on this SNL tip. I went into
Really?
Peacock, and I've been watching old episodes, including the second ever episode, which was fascinating. They had Paul Simon on as host and musical guest, and it was basically a Paul Simon concert with the occasional sketch thrown in. He got to play a bunch of different songs. He brought Garfunkel on. They did some songs together. So you could tell the show was still kind of figuring itself out then. So they really leaned on Paul Simon's music for that second ever episode.
It's evolved a lot. And even in the retrospectives that we saw over the weekend, there was an acknowledgement that George Carlin being on the first show, he kind of came in and out, and the docudrama that they did behind the scenes really leaned into that. So yeah, it continues probably to still be a work in progress. It kind of found its groove relative to the separation, but at times the integration of the musical acts into the show. But all right, well, I mean, there's always another episode, I guess, for you to watch. I only have one thing, and it's over there on Netflix, American Murder. It's another documentary. Gabby Petito, who you may remember, just a horribly sad story, but it also highlights the reality that in which we live in today, where everything is recorded and everything is preserved. And, the good part of that is that we have this living history, oftentimes in video and oftentimes in incredibly clear video. And, this young girl who ultimately was found, she and her boyfriend went on a cross-country trip, and she was vlogging on a daily basis. And so we have all of this footage of both of them out there in the wilderness, and then obviously the murder happens, and it goes into the amount of information that we had and the sleuthing that was done even by people that aren't involved in law enforcement. And it's an incredibly fascinating, but also an incredibly sad story. But I do recommend it. I think it's 3 episodes over there on Netflix. Mosse, what do we have today? And shall we light this candle?
Let's do it.
All right. We have, as we mentioned, Taylor Twellman. I don't know how many times he's come on this show, but this has got to be 3 or 4 times that he has. And we certainly remember him from last year, probably a couple of times, and the preview that he gave us. And with the 30th year of MLS upon us happening this weekend, the whistle will blow. We thought it's a perfect time to bring Taylor, who is the voice and the face of Major League Soccer over there on Apple, on the show once again to give us a little top-level preview of what to see. So without further ado, let's go to Taylor Twellman. All right, as promised, the great Taylor Twellman joins us again here on the State of the Union. He and his enormous noggin are fitting into the screen here. We appreciate him. You know him. You love him. Well, at least you know him, and you certainly know his face and his voice when it comes to all things MLS over there for Apple. And we find ourselves on the verge of yet another season, but a very special season, the 30th season for Major League Soccer, Taylor, and welcome. All right, give us a couple of things to think about when it comes to this 30th season of Major League Soccer. A couple big picture things. If you're bringing people into the tent, which I know you love to do.
Buddy, you will resonate with this. If you would have asked us about 15, 20 years ago when the MLS owners were assessing Major League Soccer and trying to figure out expansion, I can promise you two markets they desperately wanted to get into. St. Louis, Missouri, which they did so a couple years ago, and now San Diego. So I find it fitting that the 30th year, the 30th franchise is a market that they've been talking about for a long, long time. San Diego, California has been around since the 70s. It's always been a market where soccer is in the fabric of the city, no matter what level their first division's playing at, and their appreciation for the national team. When you look at the viewership numbers for the US men's and women's national team, San Diego is always in the top 10. So I think it's fitting that in the 30th year of this league, not only is it a league not surviving anymore, but thriving. I think it just fits that it's San Diego. I also find it intriguing of what Inter Miami is going to do. You and I did this exact same podcast to preview last year, and I told you I just don't know if they're going to win more than one trophy, while everyone else has them winning 3, 4, 5 trophies. And it didn't happen. Suarez is a year older. Messi's a year older. The roster's not as deep. I don't know if Messi and company can beat their record for most points in the regular season, but more importantly, he's got World Cup qualifying. They've got the Club World Cup. What do they look like at the end of the year? A bunch of eyeballs are going to be on this. Whether or not Messi plays the full 2026 season, none of us know what he's going to do during that World Cup season. I think this one is MLS Cup or bust. They know that. And I'll be shocked if there isn't a move or two to try to make them a little deeper in that progress.
Quick follow-up. You mentioned San Diego, and you told us what you think about Inter Miami. So where does San Diego ultimately finish up? Is this a St. Louis type of thing where they burst on the scene and defy all expectations? Okay, so this is a much more normal type of expansion team that struggles, which is mostly what happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Alexi, nobody, including myself, and St. Louis raised me. If you would have told me they were going to win the Western Conference, I would have looked at you in the camera and said, I don't know if they make the playoffs. They were the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. I don't see that from San Diego this year. I also don't see Cincinnati in the wooden spoon for 3 years either. I think there are weaker teams in the West. I think this team is set up. They just beat the New York Red Bulls in their final tune-up game. That was the New York Red Bulls' first team. Mm-hmm. They beat them 6-0 in preseason. I think San Diego is going to fight for a playoff spot, and I think if you get into the playoffs, it's a success. Now, ask me that question if Kevin De Bruyne ends up in San Diego this summer, which is still a real talked about rumor, then that changes. But I think Chucky Lozano is Carlos Vela 2.0. I think Dreyer is a fantastic signing. Now, how do the other pieces come together? That remains to be seen. I just think it's in the middle of the expansion spectrum. I don't think it's Atlanta. I don't think it's LAFC. But I also don't think it's Minnesota United. I don't think it's Cincinnati with how they came into their first seasons.
Got it.
Taylor, it's been a crazy offseason, some big incoming and outgoing transfers, but the new wrinkle with cash for players was all these big moves within MLS, Lucho Acosta, Vander, Joveljic. What do you make of cash for players, and what do you make of this offseason as a whole?
Mosse, I love it. I love it. More so because all of us have been trying to grow Major League Soccer outside our United States and North America bubble. I think this rule in this transaction mechanism now allows for people outside the United States and outside of Major League Soccer in Canada to say, hang on a minute, now I understand that. I also think you get what the players are worth. Evander was worth 12 to 13 million. Cincinnati goes and does that. Dejan Joveljic was worth 4 to 6 million because Liga MX teams were trying to get him in his final season. Sporting Kansas City jumps in there. So I also think it speaks to the value of the players. I think the players are going to really benefit from this, but also I think it just creates more content for all of us on the outside to really talk about and understand. And if you're Luciano Acosta, be careful what you wish for. I think Dallas, rightfully so, go get it.
Hold on a second. Did you say that Evander's worth $12 million? Do you really think he's worth $12 million in terms of a transfer fee, even intra-MLS type of transfer?
I do. From the phone calls yes. From the phone calls they got, Alexi, the biggest reason why Evander was upset with Portland is people were calling around saying, is 14 to 16 million enough? And his dad, precarious figure, says, I wanted in the contract that there's a 15 million transfer fee. And Portland, that's where the disagreement started. Then obviously he went public, post playoffs and whatnot. I actually think Cincinnati gets a bargain because I think if Evander's on the open market and he's coming from Copenhagen or he's coming from Champions League or even South America, I think they're paying 16 to 18 million for him. And I think this is a bargain, and I think he may be the pickup of the offseason.
Awesome. All right. Off the field, we got a couple of big names coming back into the league, I guess it is, when you look in San Jose with Bruce Arena, and he's got his hands full. He's a living legend, and he's done it before, but he's got his hands full with this San Jose team and the San Jose Earthquakes that, let's be honest, have not been relevant for a long time. And then we got another former U.S. men's national team coach, Gregg Berhalter, in Chicago. He's also got his hands full. These are both reclamation types of projects. How do they do with their respective teams, you think?
I love the fact that both of these men were picked for their respective projects. Listen, if you're San Jose and you're operating now in a Western Conference where you're barely talked about and you're barely observed because of how you've, one, built your roster, and two, with what other teams are doing, if you need to start over and build a culture, I don't care if Bruce Arena's 150 years old, he's the guy that you call. Now, is the roster good enough to compete? I don't know that answer as of right now, but I do know Bruce Arena knows what the hell he's doing. And I do know that Bruce Arena is going to push the right buttons to maximize that group. Now, the question is, as I just said, whether or not the group has enough. But you got Chicha Arango for 50 cents to $1. You got Joseph Martinez coming in. He goes out and gets guys that he brought to New England, and Dave Romney, Mark Anthony Kaye, Ian Harkes. Alexi, I think that's going to be an interesting one to watch, and I think they're fighting for a playoff spot. I don't think that's a long shot. For Chicago, listen, Mansueto's done everything he can to try to bring them back. And it's fantastic that he is now the owner of the Chicago Fire. But the way he operated and the way that team operated in the first couple of seasons under his ownership, it just wasn't good enough. He knew that, but he wanted to time this decision at the right time. And I think he got a great guy in Gregg Berhalter. Now, Gregg Berhalter wants the keys to the castle. He wants to buy his groceries, cook his groceries, and serve it to the people as well. That's totally fine. I think he has shown in Columbus that he can do that. Now, I don't know where the roster is at the moment. You're asking me on February 19th, but I do know the ideology of Gregg Berhalter, what he wants to get out of it. If I'm a Chicago Fire fan, I've got to be pretty positive in the direction that they're going. And let me make a big picture point on this. Major League Soccer is exponentially better when the Chicago Fire are where they were when I was playing in this league, Alexi, when you were playing in this league. And Joe Mansueto knows that. They've got to come back. There's absolutely no reason in Major League Soccer in the 30th year that Chicago shouldn't be top 3 or 4 markets in the East. And you can make an argument, top 5 or 6 markets in the United States. I think that's ultimately the goal by hiring Gregg Berhalter.
All right, so this is the final question on that then. When all is said and done at the end of the year, who makes a better dish? Bruce Arena in San Jose or Gregg Berhalter in Chicago?
The Eastern Conference is more difficult. So Gregg Berhalter could have a better season than San Jose, but he might be fighting for a lower seed in the Eastern Conference.
Man.
You're right now saying
that on me. Come on.
No,
man.
I'm just saying. Well, follow me on this. San Jose can make the playoffs with 41 points, and Greg has 49 or 50, and they're in the 9th seed. Like, I'm just saying, it is possible with how the MLS playoffs work.
Suck it up, Buttercup. Figure it out.
San Jose gets more bang for their buck. That was a long-winded way of me coming around to, I think San Jose gets more bang for their buck.
Okay.
Taylor, last year Messi was the 11th straight foreigner to win MVP. The last American to win it was Mike McGee in 2013. We've talked about MLS becoming a buying league for foreigners, a selling league for Americans. There are people who think that should change in the lead up to the 26th World Cup. They're advocating for MLS to try to sign some big U.S. international players, your Pulisic's, McKennie's, Reyna's. What do you make of that?
One, it's a great question. Two, I think it's a crux of an issue, right? This league started with the gentleman that's next to you and his generation of building something in 1996 that helped the American player grow, that helped the American player find his way to the international market. In the first 15 years, you'd have to say it was really good. It still is. It's just a different kettle of fish. I think the American player has to find a way to be at the forefront of some of these MLS rosters. And I actually have a way to do that. I firmly believe that if you have a homegrown player and he turns into a designated player, that designated player spot shouldn't count to the roster. Majority of the designated players right now are foreign. But what if it's an American homegrown that gets you that? Now that actually puts an emphasis on developing Americans. Another one is a U22 signing. You signed a U22 player and he turns in to a DP. I'd argue let's add some flexibility there. You've worked it. You've developed a young player. His market value is such that he can now be paid as a DP. Again, Mosse, that's going to help the American player. I don't know if Pulisic, McKennie, and whatnot need to come back to Major League Soccer. We saw that in 2014. I didn't think that U.S. team was going to get out of their group with Portugal, Germany, and Ghana. And guess what they did with Michael Bradley, Clint Dempsey, Josie Altidore coming back to Major League Soccer. I just think on a macro level, the American player's got to find his way in Major League Soccer. It's a little bit more difficult than it was 15 years ago when I was playing. And I don't think Major League Soccer should lose sight of that. But that comes up to the academy player coming through. Kevin Sullivan's 15. He's going to be a huge part of the Philadelphia Union this year. Man City called him the best 14-year-old in the world. Mosse, what happens if he scores 6, 7, 8 goals? Yeah, we get it. They're selling him to Manchester City, but Major League Soccer is still playing a part in that. It's just a different kettle of fish than when I was playing 15 years ago.
All right. You just made a couple of really interesting suggestions, which is interesting in and of itself that you made them. But we love to tell people how to spend their money.
Yes, we do. Yep.
So, yep. And also we love to tell people what to do, whether it's MLS or anything else. So I guess it's a twofold question. A lot of talk about MLS possibly going to a European schedule in the future. One, do you see that? Do you see that? All right, you already love it, but you see that happening. And then two, and this is much more American soccer, with the recent announcement from USL about them wanting to become a Division I league, and I guess on the surface, certainly competing with MLS. Do you see that happening, and how does that change the landscape of American soccer?
I think what's interesting, Alexi, is about 5-6 years ago, when we talked about changing to the European schedule, many owners would tell me there's no way it's happening. And what has really surprised me in my 20 plus years in this league is how quickly this league has evolved and grown and is willing to change. I think a lot of that comes on the, I would say, doorstep of Don Garber being the commissioner in building this league where it is. 5-6 years ago, if I would have asked that same question you just asked me, every owner would have said, I don't think so. I don't think it's going to happen. The fact that they're looking at it, the fact that they're seriously looking at it, tells you that they're now a player on the world market. And why do you need to change the schedule to the top 5 leagues in the world, particularly in Europe? Is because it means you're going to make more money on your incoming or outgoing transfers. And incoming, you're not going to be paying the premium because you need to make a decision before the end of the transfer window over there. I do think it happens, but I think they've got to figure out ways where certain markets got to play their games. And the other part to that, Alexi and Mosse, is you're playing your most important games away from the NFL. Anytime you can do that, I think you resonate and you become a real player in the vernacular of American sports and what that is. The USL thing's as intriguing as anything. And Alexi, you've said this for a long time, and I couldn't agree with you more now that I've gotten older, is that, listen, you want to build a better mousetrap? Go ahead, try and do it. Fine. I think this is all USL looking at saying, hang on a minute. The World Cup is here in North America. We want to use that momentum and do it. Now, Paul McDonough was asked many questions about what it's going to look like and how it's going to go. And he flat out said, we got to get our ducks in a row and we got to figure that out. Major League Soccer is in 30 markets in its 30th year. Their growth and their expansion and how quickly that has happened, I think we'd be remiss not to talk about it. And I think it's a compliment that USL is looking at and saying, hang on, we want to give you some competition. What that looks like, Alexi, I have no idea because I really haven't been given any indicators from USL and what that's going to look like.
Taylor, the last team to win back-to-back MLS Cups was the Galaxy in 2011 and 2012. They're now trying to repeat again this season. They're going to be without Ricky Puig for most of the campaign. What chance do you give the Galaxy to go back-to-back?
Mosse, my hot take is I think they're going to really be fighting for a playoff spot. I do. I look at this team. Listen, the Galaxy mantra has always been we win one and we repeat. They repeat against us. They beat us twice in 3 years, whatever it was. But my point is that the Galaxy win trophies and they want to win more. You lose Jovic, you lose Brugman, you lose Delgado. Ricky Puig, I don't care if he's healthy and back in the summer. This is a torn ACL and other ligaments. To count on Ricky Puig to be that guy immediately coming back from that ACL, from experience of seeing teammates and my family members and whatever it is, the ACL injuries are a real injury. You got to really be careful what you expect. Joseph Paintsil is not ready for the first 6 to 8 weeks. So I look at this team. Yoshida's older. I just don't know. It doesn't look like a deep team to me. Marco Reus is in and out of the preseason lineups due to injury. Can you count on him to fill the gap of what Ricky Puig was last year? I think Christian Ramirez was a smart, pragmatic pickup until the summer comes, and then they can make a decision. But again, he's without Paintsil. He's without Puig. I mean, of the 3 killer Ps last year, 2 of them are going to be missed in the first 8 weeks, and 1 of them is going to be missed for more than 6 months. I think the Galaxy are going to be up against it. I just think Greg Vanney knows that and may change the system a little bit. But it wouldn't surprise me if you guys are texting me and we're talking to each other in June and July, and we're like, that's been a little bit of a slog for the defending champions.
All right, listen, you know as well as I do that every team that we did not discuss on this podcast in MLS,
they're going to be mad.
They're going to be mad. So let them be mad. But listen, by the grace of the soccer gods, you are still employed for some reason. And so I will give you the opportunity to wax poetic when it comes to your employer over there when it comes to Apple. What are we going to see as this continued experiment unfolds between the partnership of MLS and Apple going forward as they broadcast this league?
2 things, Big Red. First and foremost, this documentary that comes out February 21st, you've known me for a long time. I love watching things outside of my realm to learn, to understand. I was never a Formula One racing fan. Drive to Survive brought me in. The same producers, same directors are now doing Onside, which is a documentary on Apple TV that will debut February 21st. I've seen the first 3 or 4 episodes. Buddy, it's as good as it gets. And I think it's only fitting in the 30th year that Major League Soccer opens their doors, all access. They don't have a say in any of this. And I'm telling you, there's controversy, there's conflict, there's villains, there's everything you and I have been talking about for the last 20 years. I think Onside is really going to open its doors because of the Apple TV vehicle, and it can be seen in over 108 countries. It's going to open its doors a little bit where maybe we haven't been in those homes. The other one is the news that, listen, Apple told me when I came on board, we listen to the consumers. We're a marketing company. We're a product company. The first 2 years, there was a lot of conversation about the schedule. There was a lot of conversation that when you buy MLS Season Pass on Apple TV, you're only really seeing 1.5 games because so many games are at 7:30, 10:30 Eastern time on Saturday. You're going to see a much more of a full weekend. For instance, this weekend will start at 4:30. It was going to start at 2:30, but Miami postponed their game to 7:30. My point is there's going to be a lot of games at 2:30, 4:30 on Saturday. Then you got your MLS 360, 7:30, 10:30 Eastern, and then Sunday Night Soccer. You and I have done this for many years, whether it's at Fox, whether it's at ESPN. Apple's going to do the same thing. So there will be a standalone game on Sunday Night Soccer. We've got an hour pregame, hour postgame. And yeah, they gave me a camera where you can actually see my face this time, Alexi. So maybe we'll lose viewers, but who knows?
Sounds awesome. Sounds awesome. Mosse?
Taylor, when you came on last year, we talked about the whole MLS Cup versus Supporter Shield Michigas. You were adamant that the MLS Cup is the bigger trophy to win. So what did you make of Inter Miami getting that Club World Cup spot instead of the Galaxy, and the way FIFA handled it, waiting for Inter Miami to win the Supporter Shield and then deciding that was the criteria?
Mosse, are you surprised at all that FIFA would look at the situation and say, hang on a minute, what? So how does he play? Like, how does he get in? Listen, I think if Major League Soccer had their way, Columbus Crew's in the Club World Cup. I really do. Now, in saying that, this is the first edition of Club World Cup. When FIFA made that decision, the television rights hadn't been paid for yet. And if there's one player where you sit there and say, okay, fine, I understand it. But I don't think the criticism of Major League Soccer on that is necessarily fair, because I don't think they were fully consulted on how they should handle that. And on the other hand, again, it's Messi. It's the first edition. It's in his backyard. I don't think any single person was really surprised that FIFA said, you know what, we're going to make sure Inter Miami gets in. Now, if they had won the Supporter Shield, Mosse, we would have been having a different conversation.
All right, listen, Taylor, we got to get you out of here, but I want to end it up here with a kind of rapid fire. You've done this before, and really appreciate your time here. When it comes to like we said, the 30th season, which is just around the corner, the whistle blows this weekend, and Taylor and all the wonderful men and women in front and behind the camera will be, as you heard, giving us hours and hours and hours of content, whether it's the actual games or the behind-the-scenes stuff that's going on. All right, 2025 MLS season Golden Boot winner.
Kevin Denke.
Ooh, okay. 2025 season MVP.
Messi.
Whoa. All right. 2025.
And by the way, Alexi and Mosse, nobody's ever repeated. He would have to repeat, right? He would have to.
I mean, you wouldn't put it past him given what he's doing. Coach of the year for 2025.
Gregg Berhalter.
Oh, God. I want that just for the content.
I just want, by the way, I only answered that for your clicks.
And finally, MLS Cup champion 2025.
MLS Cup champion, FC Cincinnati.
All right, FC Cincinnati. Every time that you come on this show, and you and everybody that comes on the show, I ask this question, and I ask it again because in time, either you have evolved, maybe changed, want to add, want to subtract. Best and worst thing about American soccer, my friend?
The best thing is I don't think we've reached our pinnacle yet, which is as exciting as anything else. And the worst thing is we love to eat our own. We love a good home-cooked meal, and we love to eat our own. I took that right out of your playbook, my friend.
I love it. Now, listen, we can't let you go because I know that you live in Greater Boston, and you are a big hockey fan. We are recording this on Wednesday.
So
tomorrow,
good.
USA versus Canada. Who wins, and what have you thought of this tweak, if you will, to the NHL? I know we're not calling it an all-star game, but obviously with the numbers that are coming in, it has gone over great guns both here and north of the border.
Alexi, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's only fitting that two St. Louis guys, two brothers, Kachucks, would absolutely turn this thing and flip it on its head. Big Red, it's as good as it gets. Tip of the cap to the NHL. Because quite honestly, I haven't watched the All-Star game since Pavel Bure was in that for the Vancouver Canucks. So the reality is it's real. I was texting with Sean McDonough, who's the lead broadcaster for this. He said it's been better than anyone at ESPN and ABC thought it was going to be. I hope Thursday night that every single American in Boston claps and cheers for the Canadian national anthem just to show them we are different. Because you booing the national anthem, miss me with that.
Right? Oh, my goodness. Are you going to go?
I am doing everything in my power to do so. I just need to change a flight that doesn't get flipped over and changed. So if I get there, I'm sending you pictures.
All right. And who wins?
U.S. Come on. There's no way. Now, I'm nervous, right? But, you know, McAvoy's out with an upper body injury, so I'm a little nervous, but I'd be stunned if Canada goes in there and wins that.
All right. Come for the soccer, stay for the hockey with Taylor Twellman.
Mosse, do you have any idea what we're talking about right now?
Oh, absolutely. I was into it on Saturday. Big win in Montreal. By the way, I love the idea that Canada are the bad guys here when the U.S. president is openly talking about annexing them. But in your guys' world, I guess that's the way it is.
Hey, listen, just don't put the national anthem.
Right, exactly. I would love for the folks in Boston to kind of do it because, as we know, in Boston, they would do it with kind of a smirk on their face. It would just be absolutely beautiful.
And
Listen,
they'll do it with an accent. How many times have you heard someone boo with an accent?
Exactly. All right, the great Taylor Twellman once again here on the State of the Union podcast. Check him out this weekend and all through the upcoming MLS season. Thank you, my friend.
Hey, guys, just so you know, that's not a Chicago Bears hat. That is a Colgate hat.
That's a
Colgate hat.
You know it, baby. You know it. Thanks, bud. All right. Thanks to Taylor. He's always bringing it, and it's fun to watch and hear what he has to say. And like I said, check him out this weekend, and we really appreciate that he spends time. You got something? What?
I had that stat ready to go that nobody's won back-to-back MVPs. Messi's going for that this season, but Taylor beat me to the punch.
Great minds think alike.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody has ever compared your mind to Taylor Twellman's mind, but I digress. All right, listen, Mosse, plenty of other soccer to talk about. Where should we go to first?
We had some CONCACAF Champions Cup action on Tuesday night. Colorado hosted LAFC in the first leg of that round one tie. Colorado with the 2-1 victory. All the goals in the second half. Mihailovic scored twice for them.
Great free kick from Mihailovic.
But Aaron Long scored a very important goal late for LAFC, particularly since the away goals rule is in effect.
Now, this was a frigid affair, shall we say. It looked miserable from a player perspective and a fan perspective. Mosse, I will tell you, my take from a few months ago about the way people think about these cold games and the romance behind it. I still get people that will talk to me about this. And again, the only reason that Colorado Rapids fans were happy about what happened last night was because their team won, because they had to have been miserable. And I guarantee that the players on the field were not excited about playing in the frigid conditions there. So again, get those roofs on the stadiums, people, as quickly as possible. What else? Messi, speaking of frigid games.
Yes, so we were supposed to have another game on Tuesday night, Sporting KC versus Inter Miami. That game was moved to Wednesday because of weather. We're taping this on Wednesday afternoon. By the time you hear this pod, that game will have already been played. Sporting KC hosting Messi and Inter Miami.
And if Sporting KC win, there will be whining when it comes to the frigid conditions. By the way, we heard coming into work today that evidently Messi and company, and they've already said that this is not something that they're necessarily looking forward to when it comes to the weather. They flew in the day of the game. They left at like 9-something in the morning from Miami. So they're coming in and out and spending as few amount of minutes as they possibly can in the greater Kansas City area. All right, what else?
We transitioned to the UEFA Champions League. The playoff round is in the books. On Tuesday, AC Milan hosted Feyenoord, looking to overturn a 1-0 first leg deficit. Pulisic and Mosse both started. Santi Jimenez scored in the opening minute. Pulisic involved, so that leveled the tie. But then in the second half, Theo Hernandez sent off. He got booked for diving. It was his second yellow. Feyenoord capitalized. Former Philadelphia Union and Inter Miami striker Julian Carranza with the goal. 1-1 the final. Feyenoord take it 2-1 on aggregate. They advance. AC Milan are out. Christian Pulisic was subbed out again early in the second half, much to the chagrin of U.S. fans. I told you on Monday this was a thing. A lot of complaining that Milan's Portuguese coach, Sergio Conceição, is showing favoritism to Rafael Leão and João Felix. So some of this good feeling that's surrounded Pulisic's time in AC Milan so far seems to be dissipating right now.
Yeah, and for those that are watching, you can see we have some of these posts up here of people talking about what they feel is the mismanagement, but more importantly, talking about what you mentioned when it comes to Pulisic and, shall we call it Pulicism or Pulicists out there in the way that he is being treated.
Yeah, one of those posts read, Pulisic off and Felix staying on is blasphemy, horrible management. Felix has done nothing for this club. Pulisic has carried it for a year and a half. Smells like Portuguese favoritism to me. Felix is dog shit everywhere he goes. And then another one, Pulisic should hold off on signing that extension with Milan if Conceição is going to treat him this way in favor of Felix. Pulisic needs to seriously consider moving during the summer transfer window.
Wow. That is some. I think I just read a story from Gab Marcotti out there about the situation that Pulisic is in, and the potential. It's not a problem, but I think his argument is that he's just doing everything for the team. It's almost as if he's being too good relative to the situation, and his behavior is so exemplary that, as we know, the squeaky wheel sometimes gets the oil, and maybe if he were more adamant about the situation, things would be changing. By the way, I knew that AC Milan was in trouble when Santi Gimenez didn't celebrate. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes, absolutely.
So I knew that there was a problem. Scored a goal, albeit against his former team. You celebrate. You celebrate with you dance with the ones that brung you, and you celebrate and you give the respect to the team that values you and is paying your salary.
I know this has always been one of your big
Drives
issues.
Me crazy.
Although Brahim Diaz did not celebrate when he scored for Real Madrid against Manchester City at the Etihad, and that tie worked out fine for Real Madrid, as we're going to discuss in a moment. But so AC Milan are out. João Felix, it is fascinating because every manager that gets their hands on him, they think they can be the ones to unlock that key. He's such a talented player that they think they can be the ones to turn him into one of the best players in the world, and it never quite happens. But we're sort of in that honeymoon period that João Felix has at every new club where everybody's tantalized by the talent, so they're going to give him chances to see if he can prove himself.
Are you buying this conspiracy theory out there when it comes to Christian Pulisic? And by the way, if it is even remotely true, it's nothing new that Christian Pulisic and every American hasn't gone through, and the onus is ultimately on the American to fight through it. Now, I think the argument is that Christian Pulisic has done not just so much, but more so than anybody at AC Milan, and certainly in history when it comes to an American player, and that if anybody should be given the benefit of the doubt, it is Christian Pulisic given his input.
I just think when you change coaches so often, each new guy that comes in, you do have to prove yourself a little bit again. Yes, he's bought a lot of currency at that club, but most of it was under Pioli and Fonseca, so now he's got to do it all over again under Conceição, so that is tough because he has been phenomenal for the past year and a half, so you'd think he'd get more of a benefit of the doubt. We'll see. AC Milan away to Torino in Serie A this upcoming weekend. Also on Tuesday, Bayern Munich played host to Celtic, looking to protect a 2-1 lead. Celtic scored in the second half with a German, Nicholas Kuhn, but then in stoppage time, Alphonso Davies with a scrappy goal. So 1-1 the final. Bayern take it 3-2 on aggregate. Celtic with a very good go of it. And Cameron Carter-Vickers and Austin Trusty acquitted themselves quite well against Harry Kane and company.
They played well. It was nice to see the Americans. And look, it's always, given our CONCACAF region, it's nice to see Alphonso Davies play a part. But this Bayern Munich team just squeaked through and left it late. And with all due respect to Celtic, this was much closer than a lot of people thought it was going to be, or probably should have been, given the talent and the disparity between the two teams.
As for those two American center backs, they're roughly the same age, but there's something about Trusty that I find more intriguing than Carter Vickers. I guess because I've seen him less with the national team. Carter Vickers, it's a little bit of that I know what you are at this point. So I don't know. In this eternal search for a new center back to emerge, is Austin Trusty somebody that you want to get more of a look at?
I mean, because it's like next man up, the same thing with the striker position. Literally, if you have an American passport and you are playing well, and maybe, to your point, we don't know the reality of it. And this gets somebody had asked me earlier on X about Sargent, and, we extrapolated out, and we are as guilty as anybody here on the State of the Union because we look at it through a U.S. lens, and it's relative to the national team. And so when Sargent is scoring a lot of goals, we say, all right, well, hopefully he can do that for the national team. And I think we all recognize and respect that the circumstances oftentimes dictate how successful you are. And when those circumstances change, you're not always able to translate that to the national team. But yes, that's a long answer to a question of, I think anybody and everybody that plays that center back position at any level should be brought in and should be seen, especially since we don't have, while we have the Gold Cup this summer, We don't have qualifying. And so the opportunities that Pochettino has, while they're few and far between, he also has an ability to kind of just test some people and figure it out for himself and maybe even make some changes.
Before we depart Tuesday, did you see Club Brugge beat Atalanta 3-1 to
Yes.
complete a 5-2
Italy's
aggregate
had
triumph?
a rough week.
Yep. Ademola Lookman missed a penalty, and afterwards, Gasperini, his manager, said he had no business taking the penalty. He's one of the worst penalty kick takers I've ever seen. He's horrible in training. Then Lookman clapped back on social media, said he didn't like his manager throwing him under the bus like that. So Atalanta, who are in third place in Serie A, just 5 points off the top, having a good season. All of a sudden, there's some turmoil there.
I respect the fact that traditionally, when it comes to coaches in all sports, the way you go about your business is to not throw your players under the bus. But it's out of survival, right? Because you are going to need them. And if and when you lose them by doing something public like that, it's rare that you are able to repair that damage. However, I love when someone does something like this, when a coach does something like this, because I think too often, we'll yell and scream about coaches, but I think too often the reality of the situation is kept secret, and you're not really protecting anybody. So I have no sympathy at all. Now, I say that because there obviously must have been something ahead of time that said either this person takes it or, in no uncertain terms, this person does not take it. And that it happened. I like giving players autonomy, and maybe no sport out there gives you more autonomy than soccer. But in this case, because it was this particular player, because they missed, I think it's completely legitimate for a coach to come out and almost to defend himself relative to the actions that the players took. Now, ultimately, it's going to come down on him anyway because he's a coach. It's much easier to fire a coach if and when a change were to be made. But I kind of like it when coaches do something like this. You can't be doing it every single time because then you kind of wash your hands of the whole situation. But I like it.
Although, with this pod, Sean and Kyla occasionally make mistakes. I never air them out publicly. We always handle that internally.
You scream at them off camera, right? I mean, and to be fair, you've softened a little bit in your older age, but still, I mean, the Sir Alex hairdryer treatment and stuff like that, they got nothing on David Mosse when he gets mad.
We transitioned to Wednesday. Borussia Dortmund hosted Sporting. It finished 0-0, so Dortmund took it 3-0 on aggregate. Gio Reyna did not start. He came on as a sub in the second half. This match occurring against the backdrop of stories in the German media that Dortmund planned to sell Gio in the summer.
I mean, we've heard it before, right? So should we believe this now? And is it because they have come to the realization that maybe others have that we shan't work with each other again? It's a Spinal Tap reference, but you never say never. And who knows? Time can change things. I'm getting tired, as I said on the pod. I think it was last pod or a couple pods ago. Nobody gets more of a benefit of the doubt than Gio Reyna. But with what is going on and the reality of the situation right now, it would not surprise me in the least if somebody says, all right, listen, we have gone as far as we can go. And for whatever reasons, and it could be on field, off the field, I don't know. And again, I have no inside information, but obviously he is not a starter. And I think you and many people feel that he can start in other places. And so if that's the case, let's just, go our separate ways. It didn't work out the way that everybody wanted it to, but it might work out going forward. But I'll believe it when I see it.
Also on Wednesday, PSV hosted Juventus, looking to overturn a 2-1 deficit. It was 2-1 PSV after 90 minutes. Perisic and Saibari scored for PSV. Timmy Weah scored for Juventus with a sensational strike. So that sent the tie to extra time, and then Flamingo scored for PSV. So 3-1 on the night, 4-3 on aggregate. PSV advance. Juventus are out of the Champions League.
Wow. Italy the hits just keep on coming for Italy this week.
And from a U.S. perspective, under different circumstances, it would be great to have PSV still in it. But all the Americans are injured. Pepe, Tillman, Dest. Who knows when any of them are going to be back. So actually, this is disappointing to lose McKennie and Weah.
Yeah, we could have had a lot of Americans playing in this game if everybody was healthy. By the way, the first touch from Perisic, I mean, rolling back time, still a wonderful player, wonderful finish. And then, I know it's in a losing effort ultimately, but from an American perspective, Tim Weah hit the snot out of that ball, got all of it. In the moment, it was actually flagged for offside, but they reviewed it and gave it to him, and the soccer gods did smile upon him. That was wonderful. But Weston and Timmy, arrivederci. Arrivederci.
So in terms of Americans that are active and playing, it's just Gio Reyna and Ledesma, right? We lost Pulisic, Musa, Carter Vickers, Trusty, Balogun, Monaco. He's been injured anyway, but Monaco went out on Tuesday. And
Slim
then,
pickings.
Weah and McKennie on Wednesday. The big one, though, was at the Bernabeu. Real Madrid hosted Manchester City. Real Madrid with a 3-2 aggregate lead. And they made easy work of Manchester City today with a 3-1 victory to complete a 6-3 aggregate triumph. Kylian Mbappe with a hat trick, all 3 Real Madrid goals. So they cruise into the next round. Manchester City crash out.
I mean, the first goal he scored was just complete route one, and then chipping the goalkeeper. And every goal had something different, but it showed his versatility. But more importantly, it just showed his ruthlessness. And, you know, when he gets the ball in, and not completely wide, because we know he's playing in a more central type of position, but he still takes up these positions out wide. And it's, 1, 2, 3 times over the ball. But then his ability to create that separation, create that space, and for everything to slow down, I mean, it is clicking for Mbappe. And, we recall a year ago or whenever we were talking about it, where is this going to work and how is he going to fit in? He's fitting in just fine.
Yeah, it took about a half a season for him to get settled. We thought it might be a little bit of an awkward dynamic there with him and Vinicius or him and Bellingham, who would be sort of the alpha dog, and it's him. I mean, this is his team now for sure. He's the one leading the way for them. Everybody else is kind of playing the role of sidekick. So, yeah, I mean, this is why he went there. And I'd say right now, clearly the best player in the world.
Bellingham got a yellow, right? So he misses the next game. Is that true?
Yeah,
Okay.
And I was trying to read his lips. Did he say F you or F off afterwards to the referee? But yeah, and by the way, 3-1 today does not tell the story of how one-sided this game was. Real Madrid toyed with Manchester City. It was incredible to see. I keep waiting for Manchester City to wake up because you look at that team sheet, it's still impressive, the names. And so, going into this tie, I talked up their chances of advancing. I think people were overrating the degree to which Real Madrid were favorites. Even going into the second leg, people were saying there was no chance. And I kept telling them, well, they're only 1 goal back. It's still Manchester City. But all those people were proven right with their pessimism because they were awful today. They didn't lay a glove on Real Madrid for much of that game. Courtois could have taken a nap and it wouldn't have mattered. It was one-way traffic.
Yeah, I mean, you're not alone in looking at the firepower and the money and the names that Pep still has at his disposal. And look, Pep's legacy is not in jeopardy. He's going to go down as one and arguably the best coach, I think, in history when all is said and done. But this is still on him. And there were no adjustments that he made. To your point, it wasn't a back and forth type of situation. And so what was already a bad, and from a Manchester City perspective, a failure of a season continues on. And this will be a resounding failure of a season when all is said and done.
Pep is such a mad scientist that when the lineup came out today and Erling Haaland was on the bench, it actually crossed my mind that he had left him out for strategic reasons, right. Even though the guys scored both their goals in the first leg. You never know with Pep. It did come out that it was injury related. So nevertheless, Manchester City are out of the Champions League. So we have a draw on Friday to determine the round of 16 matchups. We already know because teams are broken up into different quadrants. So Real Madrid and Bayern Munich, they will face either Atletico Madrid or Leverkusen. One will play the other there. We don't know. And then PSV, Eindhoven, and Feyenoord will face either Arsenal or Inter Milan. And then Dortmund and Club Brugge will face either Aston Villa or Lille. And then Benfica and PSG will face either Liverpool or Barcelona. So that's what we have to look at there.
David, how the do you do this? How is this possible? I want people to understand. Where's my camera here? I want people to understand the ridiculousness in which and awesomeness in which my friend David Mosse's mind works. That he can retain all of this information. I mean, we are literally minutes away from everything finishing, and yet there's no notes. He's doing this all in this computer that he has in his head. It is amazing. I love you so much. You're incredible.
But so looking ahead to potentially tasty matchups, I'd say PSG against either of Liverpool or Barcelona would be great. And then any combination of Real Madrid and Bayern Munich facing Atletico Madrid or Leverkusen. Will we have the all La Liga and all Bundesliga, or will they be crisscross? We'll see. But so we could have some tasty matchups in the round of 16.
All right, Mosse, I know you got your eye on some, I know producer Sean wrote matches, but I call them games. Anyway, you have your eye on some people kicking a ball in shorts coming up this week, right?
Yeah, so Manchester City, who are now out of the Champions League, are involved in the big Premier League match this upcoming weekend. They will host league leaders Liverpool. Liverpool played today, 2-2 draw away to Aston Villa. A lot of Arsenal fans were looking at this two-game stretch for Liverpool, away to Aston Villa, away to Manchester City, as a chance for them to drop some points, and Arsenal may be to make up that gap. So we'll see what happens this upcoming weekend at the Etihad.
So does Man City bounce back now that they have, I guess, nothing to play for?
Yeah, I'm losing faith in this team this season. The interesting thing, we talked about this on Monday, is this is now an Egyptian duel. You've got Mo Salah on one side, Marmoush on the other. So we know Egyptians will be tuning in. They'll be happy when either guy scores.
Does Pep need more money? Is that what's the problem is? All right, what else are you looking at?
This is a heat check by Sean Sullivan to put this in the rundown.
Okay.
Staying in England but dropping down a level, we have a top-of-the-table championship clash. Sheffield United hosting Leeds. Leeds with a 2-point lead at the top of the table. Both teams in good position to get promoted.
And why should I care about that?
Brendan Aronson.
Of course. All right. I will care about it for Brendan Aronson. I'm only saying that because it goes back to the question that I got on X earlier that I was answering about Josh Sargent. And the premise of the question was, ultimately, what is the level? And I know we've talked about this before, but real quick, when you talk about the championship, and for those that don't know, it's basically the second division of professional soccer in England. Where do you put that championship? And I know even within the championship, there's a disparity in quality.
I'm not as high on it as English people are. I've fought with them on social media about this. I think it's a very entertaining, compelling league. It's a grind. It's 46 rounds. There's a lot of parity. So it's certainly a difficult league to shine in. But from a technical level, I don't think it's all that great. So I rank it lower than some other.
But as I had said earlier on X, it does not preclude somebody who is starring and doing well in the championship from being able to translate that to the national team. But the reality is that history has shown that the U.S. wants to be an elite team. And if you look at the elite teams, very few of them have any players that are starring in the championship, let alone when it comes to strikers as it pertains to Josh Sargent. But Brendan Aronson, Josh Sargent, playing consistently, playing well, and working towards potential promotion, and then we decide we figure out whether they actually make that jump. In some cases, back to the Premier League, and if they're able to do that, that's all a good thing from a U.S. perspective.
Last order of business in this segment. Stu and I talked about this when the roster dropped. You haven't had a chance to comment yet. The SheBelieves Cup gets underway on Thursday. The U.S. will face Colombia in Houston, then they'll play Australia in Glendale, and then Japan in San Diego. No Naomi Gurman in the squad, no Rose Lavelle, none of the front three of Sophia Smith, Mal Swanson, and Trinity Rodman, but you do have Katarina Macario and also some goalkeepers auditioning to be the successors to Alyssa Nair.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing here is an Emma Hayes, and she's been very upfront and honest about the fact that she is going to mine and she is going to develop talent, and in doing so, develop competition when it comes to positions. And you mentioned the goalkeeping position, have to fill somebody, and somebody's going to come up and take it with both hands and be, whether that's the goalkeeper or any place else. But I think something that she has done is not rest on laurels. And she hasn't done that, and that's why she was hired, because she recognizes that if we're going to get back to the mount, and let's be honest, when it comes to this women's national team, as much as the Olympics have been important and are important, it's still ultimately about winning a World Cup. And in order to do that, she knows that she is going to have depth, whether it's through injury, whether it's through competition, whether it's through a tournament that requires some rotation going through. She knows that she is going to have to see as many players as possible. And until you actually throw them into the fire, and this is the next fire, if you will, when it comes to the SheBelieves Cup, you're not going to know. So I'm happy that we're seeing different names. I'm happy that we're seeing more names. I'm happy that we're seeing names that we not even have seen yet, because that's what a good coach does. And Emma Hayes is, if anything, she is a good coach.
That is it.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I'll give you some Ask Alexi. Okay, welcome back. It's time for Ask Alexi, that part of the show where you send in your comments, questions, and concerns. Keep in mind that our handle out there on all the old social media platforms is SOTU with Alexi, or you can call into our State of the Union podcast hotline, which is 657-549-2297. That's 657-549-2297. By the way, use that hashtag AskAlexi out there if you are sending stuff when it comes to social media. What do the folks want to know today, Mosse?
First up, we have a voicemail. Let's take a listen.
Hey, Lexi and Mosse, this is Spitz from D.C., and in the last episode, Mosse was hoping for love from the journalism world, but this is love from the Spitz world, and I have a Ask Mosse. For me, I got into the World Cup from watching my wife watch the 2006 quarterfinal, Argentina versus Germany, and my wife was just so into it, and that's the game that got me into soccer. So, Mosse, is there a game, a Brazil game, hopefully, that got you into soccer that was like, this is the game I want to watch? I love your podcast. Thank you, fellas.
Mosse, you take it here. Spitz wants to know from you. I'm going to give you mine, too, in a second, but I want to hear from you first, too, like Spitz.
Not really one game. I was born in Brazil, so you just become a soccer fan naturally. But I do want to say that game that he referenced, Germany-Argentina quarterfinals in 2006, was 1-1. It went to penalties. Germany advanced. Jurgen Klinsmann was the Germany coach. Jose Peckerman was the Argentina coach. What I've always found fascinating about that game is Argentina had an 18-year-old Lionel Messi on the bench. He did not play in that game, an unused sub. Peckerman didn't realize what he had. It was like Buck Showalter and Mariano Rivera in '95 against the Mariners.
Got to pay your dues, bud. Got to pay your dues.
Yeah. So, and you know, it's funny. This question, it gets me thinking. The first 3 World Cups that I followed, actually really knowing what was going on, were '94, '98, and 2002. And Brazil finished first, second, and first in those 3 World Cups. So I was very spoiled. And then we had an incredible cycle leading into 2006. In 2003, we won the U20 and Under-17 World Cup. So we were the only country ever to be the holders of all 3 levels, senior, Under-20, and Under-17. Then we won Copa America in 2004, beating Argentina on penalties in the final, won the Confederations Cup in 2005, hammering Argentina 4-1 in that final. So we were World Cup, Copa America, and Confederations Cup holders, kind of a triple crown of sorts there. Finished first in qualifying, number 1 in the FIFA rankings, had on paper would look to be one of the best squads ever with Ronaldo, Adriano, Ronaldinho, Kaká, Cafu, Roberto Carlos, overwhelming favorites in 2006 to repeat. Won our first 4 games. We get to the quarterfinals against France. We lost 1-0. Thierry Henry scored the goal. Zinedine Zidane had one of the great performances ever. I honestly remember driving around in my car after that game like, what just happened? Because I just assumed Brazil always gets to the final of every World Cup. And like, I couldn't even process that we had gotten knocked out in the quarterfinals. And sadly, that was the start of this drought where we haven't gotten to a final since then. So I've had to get used to it. But that was sort of the transition moment for Brazil, for sure.
Well, heady times. I mean, you started out, like you said, with all of this winning, and then you just assume that's just what happens on a consistent basis. I will tell you, I got into soccer. I was very, very young. We were living in Athens, Greece, and my mom kicked me out of the house and said, go down to the corner, to the sandlot, and the local Greek kids were playing. And I sat on the side as the redhead American kid that didn't speak Greek. And eventually the goalkeeper didn't show up. And so I was put in goal, put the American in goal. Then I learned some Greek. And eventually somebody else doesn't show up and I was able to play. And that was my first exposure to the actual game. My first exposure to the game from a professional perspective would had to have been like the old Detroit Express that played in the Pontiac Silverdome, and we went to a game to actually watch the Express play. Trevor Francis was the big star, and he wore white shoes. I'll never forget watching him on the AstroTurf back then wear white shoes. And then the first World Cup that got me into the sport was actually 1986, and I was 16 years old. We were at the Pikes Peak Invitational Tournament in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I'll never forget, they set up a TV in the lobby of the Holiday Inn, and we would come down and we would watch all the games. I fell in love with the sport. I fell in love with the World Cup. Obviously, I fell in love with Diego Maradona and what he did. But interestingly enough, because the U.S. wasn't in it, my adopted team was Canada, because growing up in Michigan, that was the closest Canada. We had a lot of connections to Canada, and didn't know that Canada wasn't going to go back to a World Cup for many, many years. But that's how I got in. And everybody has these stories. It's amazing how many people come up to me nowadays that talk about 94 and that kind of flag that was planted and how that changed everything in terms of their perception. So let us know what got you into the game, either the professional game or just the game in general, playing it.
A couple of notes. I mentioned the under 20 and under 17 World Cups. Those are both later this year on Fox Sports. The under 20 World Cup is in Chile, September and October, and then the under 17 World Cup is in Qatar in November. The South American under 20 championships concluded this past weekend in Venezuela. Brazil lost their opening match to Argentina 6-0 and then went on to win the tournament. So I actually was going to ask your wife, who's an Ohio State fan, how do you reconcile winning a title despite a humiliating loss to your arch rival?
Asterisk, baby.
Yeah. And then the U.S. Qualified for the under 17 World Cup. When Stu was on, we discussed their opening game, that 22-0 win over Virgin Islands. I said I didn't like running up the score. I got slaughtered in the comment section. There were people calling me a loser for that mentality. Nevertheless, the U.S. won their next two games. They beat St. Kitts and Nevis 7-0 and then Cuba 2-0. So they qualified. The U.S. Later this year will be in Qatar for the under 17 World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you take the foot off the. I think just naturally you take the foot off the gas, but it's a tournament. Whatever, just keep scoring. I said the same thing when the U.S. in the World Cup, the U.S. women's team was scoring goal after goal after goal. It's not. That's a your problem, not an our problem. So,
you and Rob Stone famously clashed over that in the post.
It was wonderful. It was wonderful. What else you got, Mosse?
Next up, we have a question on X. We talked to Taylor about the U.S.-Canada hockey game coming up. And so Dave Evans says, if only the U.S. men were as good at soccer than we are at hockey, people would see the parallel between how players of those sports care both for the game and how important it is to represent their country.
Interesting. Well, while there are certainly major differences between the sport, there are also a lot of similarities. There are also a lot of connections. I think I've told you before, I grew up playing as much hockey as soccer growing up in Michigan. And some of the thought process, a lot of the movements, a lot of the triangles that are involved in hockey, you can find in soccer. And it's no surprise, especially when you look at a lot of the foreign players in the NHL, that a lot of them play hockey, even at times warming up before the game by kicking the ball and doing all that kind of stuff. The mentality, I think a lot of people sometimes talk about the mentality, and notwithstanding that one of the knocks on soccer is the embellishment and the diving and the way that brings the game into disrepute, if you will, and you juxtapose that with, literal fighting on the ice when it comes to hockey, you would think that there's not a lot of similarities when it comes to mentality. But I want to hear a hockey story. We're talked a lot about hockey on this podcast. Years and years ago, there was something called the All-Star Cafe, and they would bring athletes in to openings of it. And I'll never forget, I walked in and they brought me as the soccer guy. And, over here was Shaq for the basketball stuff, and it went on and on. And the hockey guy at that point was Wayne Gretzky. And I'll never forget, they brought us in beforehand and had us in a room together. And so everyone's kind of shooting the shit, doing whatever. And Wayne Gretzky walked in. And look, I'm a huge hockey fan, so this is a god that just walked in. And he immediately beelined to me and said, I'm going to hang out with the soccer guy because I've found that the soccer guys are more fun and they'll drink with me. So I think that there is a connection Sometimes it's harder to see between hockey players and soccer players. But ultimately, to your point, Dave, I do think that it doesn't really matter what sport you're playing. Representing your country is something special. I don't necessarily think that hockey players take it more seriously or have any more pride in representing their country than soccer players or any other athlete for that matter. But I do think what we're seeing, and one of the things that comes into play when it comes to soccer players, and a lot of the times when we're talking about soccer players and hockey players, and certainly has been on display over the last couple of weeks with this tournament, is the pride that you feel and the responsibility that you feel. And I love that. And I love that we're celebrating that. And I love that, as Taylor was saying, hopefully everybody can kind of come together in these moments and celebrate through the lens of the sport, be it hockey, soccer, or anything else for that matter.
Now,
anything else?
Taylor, very confident the U.S. is going to win this rematch on Thursday. Director Gabe, very confident Canada is going to get some revenge here. In fact, he has said that if the U.S. wins, he will wear an Alexi Lalas jersey to Monday's taping and be photographed with it.
Really?
Now, if Canada wins, we'd like you to wear some sort of Canada jersey, hockey or soccer.
I will. As I said in the previous pod, I'm worried that the U.S. hockey team, which won earlier in the tournament, will have won the battle and ultimately loses the war. But can you imagine, Mosse, if little old USA relative to Canada when it comes to hockey were to beat Canada twice in 1 week, and once, by the way, in the Great White North? I mean, it's almost an unfair type of challenge relative to what I'm doing and what he's doing. But I'll accept it, and I will absolutely live up to it. And I would love nothing more than to see us win what would be tomorrow night in the great city of Boston, and to just do it again. So much winning, just so much winning. It would just be awesome. But I will take that bet. And so if we were to lose and therefore lose the tournament, I will wear that Canadian sweater, as they call them, next week. Anything else, Mosse?
That is it.
All right, let's take another quick break. We come back, end of our show, and I'll give you my one for the road. Okay, by the sight and sound of the van, it is the end of our show. And at the end of each and every show, I give you my one for the road. Mosse, I don't know if you saw this quote that came out from Nelson Rodriguez. I've known Nelson forever, and he has been around soccer forever in both coaching positions and executive positions. He is the MLS executive and the vice president of sporting and competition. And as we said and have talked about this episode, MLS is going into its 30th year. And his quote is, "I would expect in 30 years' time," which will be another 30 years' time, "for MLS to be the league of choice." And then when he was pressed in this interview, which is over there on ESPN, he confirmed that he meant being better than the English Premier League. So these are, this is a big and bold type of statement to say. Now, it should be noted that we are kind of repeating what has been said over the last 30 years in different ways and to different extents by many people in terms of what we hope for when it comes to Major League Soccer. But what we hope for is sometimes not necessarily realistic in the moment, or maybe even in 30 years. I will say that if you had come to me back in 1996 when MLS kicked off, and said, this is what MLS is going to look like 30 years later. And you talk about the 30 teams, you talk about the infrastructure, you talk about the development, you talk about television, you talk about broadcasting, you talk about the stadia that involved. I would have laughed in your face that it would have come this far. But I would also have said we should be competing with other leagues around the world. And my laughing would have come from, let's be honest, a history of teams and leagues that have folded over the years. And there were some difficult and delicate times that they got through. I talk a lot about doing big, bold things. And this is along those lines. But in 60 years, because if this is another 30 years added on to this, we are at this point. Probably a lot of us, including myself, will not be around to see it. That will be a pretty good return. I do think that along the way we have made mistakes, and that's acceptable and that's understandable. I do think along the way, and again, we talked to Taylor about spending other people's money, we could have moved faster and we could be further along in this vision that in this case Nelson Rodriguez is talking about. And we could be closer to being that league of choice. And when I say that league of choice, and that is a phrase that Don Garber has used often, it means being the best in the world. It's what we expect as Americans when it comes to not just our sports, but everything. But it's one of the things that we have failed to be and produce from a professional soccer perspective. And it's not for lack of money. It's not even for necessarily lack of vision. But I would love to see ultimately what MLS could be if some of the constraints and the restraints were taken off. And I get why they are there. And again, I'm spending other people's money. But I don't think it necessarily should take another 30 years to be what Nelson is talking about. At least I hope it doesn't take another 30 years. But if we continue on in the same way, with the same type of trajectory, as steady as it has been, and therefore, I think as laudable as it is, it will take us another 30 years. I want something that's on steroids. I want something that gets an injection that supersizes it and accelerates everything that is being done both on and off the field. And maybe that urgency and that impatience that I have isn't good from a business perspective, but I'd like to see it going forward. Mosse.
I predict in 30 years, MLS will be the second best league in the world, behind only the USL Division 1.
Woo, look at you, bringing it all the way back around.
Also, a couple more predictions.
Yes.
30 years from now, Sean Sullivan will be the owner of Bologna, living in that city. Kyla Morris will be directing Oscar-winning films.
Right. She will have forgotten all of our names, let's be honest.
You and I will be here in the 37th year of the State of the Union pod, interviewing a gray-haired Taylor Twellman about...
Well, listen, I'll take that. That looks like a pretty good future to me. All right, anything before we go?
That's it.
All right, listen, keep reviewing and downloading and subscribing and rating and doing all the different things that you do. I know we went a little long today, but, you'll forgive us, especially when we have a guest like Taylor Twellman. We wanted to give him his time, and he brought it and was wonderful. We thank Taylor. Keep pounding. Left, right, up, down, all that kind of stuff when it comes to the subscription buttons out there, whether it's on YouTube or anything else out there. We thank you for watching, and we thank you for listening. We will talk to you again next week. Enjoy all of the soccer that is to be had over the next few days. And like I said, we will talk to you again next week. And until then, and as always, USA! Let's go. Bring it home, USA! And size the day.